What's going on, guys? Noobs here. So it turns out that after my last video, I thought of a lot more I had to say about Breath of the Wild, specifically when it comes to the dungeons and the items. So this is yet another big spoiler warning because I'm going to go full in on Breath of the Wild, but this time I want to really hone in on what's so different and so appealing to me about the way that dungeons and items are handled in this game specifically. So this game kind of combines the 4 divine beasts and 120 shrines to kind of count as its dungeons for the game. But they're so different from what we've had in the past when you had, just like the proper, very defined dungeons or temples, whatever they were called in the specific game, right? What I really appreciated about the divine beasts is that they really make sense in the world, right? They're very explained in the story. This is why they're there and what they're doing, and they have this sort of function in the world going on that I really appreciated. Whereas so many Zelda games, you'd be like, why is this giant, extremely complicated temple thing just out here in the middle of nowhere? Like, who went into this volcano and set up all these elaborate traps, So I really enjoyed that. And part of the logic of all of this in the game is, of course, they're all going to have the same aesthetic. They all have the same functionality. They're all laid out differently and structured differently. The puzzles are different, but they're all aesthetically connected, right? They're all constructed to do this specific job. They all have this functionality. And there's this very clear theme to all of them. When I look back at this game, it's going to be the game with the dungeons that are all sort of this mechanical theme and that all involve rotating things on the map to make them move around. Whereas my frustration with a lot of Zeldas leading up to this one was the dungeons felt very paint by numbers. It's like, okay, we're going to have the lava one, the water one, the forest one, the scary one, the desert one, the ice one, and it's not interesting, but that's what's so cool about this. Now, if you ask me, do I want this kind of dungeons again in the next Zelda? No, absolutely not. This game did that. Now let's think of a new thing, a new theme to build our dungeons around. But I can't really wrap this subject up without talking about the shrines as well. There's 120 of them, and again, they're all on the same theme. They're all the same aesthetic. They're all solved in very different ways, but when you look back at this game, you think, oh, this is the game that had those shrines with that certain kind of technology look to them, right? As far as what I want to see in the future of Zelda Dungeons, there's not really a game I can think of to compare this to. Maybe something more like D&D style, dungeon crawls where you're just going through the overworld and you just stumble upon the ruins of a castle or a cave or something, and you get in there and there's some weird monster or monsters, and it's sort of like a mini version of a more traditional Zelda dungeon where you're just going through a few rooms doing a couple puzzles, more like mini dungeons. So I'd like to see more like that, almost like a hybrid of the shrines and bigger dungeons. And of course, you can't just do 3 and then 7 of that style. I'm talking more like the 120 of the shrines. But that's just what I'd like to see going forward. I think also if you're doing that, that allows you to bring more of the combat back into the dungeons. Obviously, in Breath of the Wild, there's very little combat either in the Divine Beasts or in the Shrines, right? There's just the boss fights and the tests of strength. Outside of that, there's virtually no combat, right? But in more sort of the mini dungeon concept that I'm imagining, you get more of a mix that way. Now, whether you're talking about the dungeons or the shrines, one other major change in this game is they took away that old Zelda tradition of each dungeon has an item that you find in that dungeon, and it functions as a sort of key that solves a lot of the puzzles that are in that dungeon, right? It's like you go, oh, I found the hook shot in this dungeon. Oh, it turns out the hook shot is how I solve a bunch of the puzzles in this dungeon, right? They took all that away, And the way they present items in this game is very different as well. You might not even realize it, but I mean, they've sort of separated the weapons from the items more directly, right? You've got swords, shields, bows, and I guess boomerangs technically are all sort of treated as disposable weapons that you just burn through. The more traditional Zelda items are really those upgrades you get for your Sheikah Slate at the beginning of the game, right? The bombs, the magnet, the time stopping, the ice. And then those items are applied, those are sort of your keys to solving the puzzles of the game, right? And sometimes there are other weird ways you can solve things with weapons and things, but generally those are the keys you have to work with. Again, I really appreciated this change. I love that you can just go tackle any shrine or dungeon in any order, and you're going to be able to do it with the tools that are provided. Again, if you ask me, do I want this in future Zelda games? Well, not exactly, but, you know, remix this idea, right? You can have different kinds of items applied to a different type of Sheikah Slate type mechanic, right? Personally, I miss the hook shot. I can't really think of any others off the top of my head that I really miss. I don't need the spinner back or anything, but you know, it's so refreshing. And you know, they can maybe add one or two, maybe they can drop one, right? They can play with this in future Zelda games without just reverting back to that old formula. Well, that's it for me. If you're sick of these Zelda videos, you're in luck, because I'm going to take a little Zelda break while I send in my left Joy-Con for the sync issue repair. But let me know what you guys think. Are you happy with the huge changes that Breath of the Wild introduces to the Zelda franchise, specifically when it comes to dungeons and items? Do you miss the old-style dungeons? That is one complaint I've heard a bit. Let me know in the comments, and thanks for watching.